look at the rates of crime in incarceration in the United States, 40% of our prisons are black. 60% of our prison population are racial and ethnic minorities. We make up 40% of that 60. That's still way too high. And then if you were just to look at the numbers, per 100,000, we lock up about 3,000 blacks. Versus, about 782 for whites and 460 for, or 782 for Latinos, 460 for whites. It's still too high. The United States locks up more people in the industrialized world than anywhere else. But we're free. Right? So if you think about what happens when you've been incarcerated and how difficult it is when you are released. Right? Let's go to the next slide. So let's take an example of Oakland. So on any given day, there are about 8,000 people on probation, 2,200 plus parolees. And when you think about going to get a job, there's the box that says, have you committed a felony? Going to get housing, there's that box that says, have you committed? Going to get a student loan, there's that box. And so what you're basically doing is, if you arrest someone, whether it be because of drugs or not, some other nonviolent crime, and they end up getting convicted and get a felony, then what happens? What's their pathway back to having a real life, to being able to take care of their family, and so forth? So it becomes almost impossible. It becomes almost impossible. And that's one of my colleagues who was a professor at MIT when I was there, was on my committee. When he was a professor at Columbia University, he says it's interesting. Columbia being right there in Harlem, young white kids on campus smoking marijuana, doing drugs all day long. Campus police come, put it out, let me confiscate it. Cross the street. Don't be black doing that, because NYPD comes in and throws you in jail. And so you have these two crimes going on at the same time. I see that at Berkeley. Walk down Telegraph Avenue on any given day, you'll see young skater kids, alternative kids, smoking, strong stuff. You can't linger, and you might not get your election. And I joke about it because it's serious. But the Berkeley police act like they don't see it. But if you're black, right, we already know what's been happening to me. So there's this inequality that's happening. And we know that and how that impacts our community. So from a financial perspective, whether it be black on black crime or drug-related crimes, the impact that it has on the victim, the impact that it has on the person who was actually convicted of the crime, the fact that it does destroy community cohesion, right? So the social fabric of a community just starts to get torn apart, which I see in East Oakland, and in my work, and also in Richmond, and other places I work, Detroit and Chicago and so forth. It's a big problem. It's a big problem. So, you just think about then when a city gets a negative reputation, or an area gets a negative reputation. So, for instance, South LA now not being called South Central, right? Because people have this negative connotation. But once you get a certain reputation, whether it be the Detroits of the world, the Oaklands, people don't want to invest there. People are like, oh, you. And then they actually come see and they say, it's just like every city, right? There's good parts, there's bad parts. The difference is that when someone gets shot in the San Francisco Chronicle, they name the neighborhood. Oh, it was in Bayview. Or it was in Bernal Heights. When someone gets shot in Oakland, it's front page. Someone got shot in Oakland. Right? You think Oakland, if you step in Oakland, you're going to get shot. Right? But the fact of the matter is it's specific neighborhoods. And that happens to all cities. So, we can get into why that might be happening from a political perspective. And then I won't go on and on, but, I will point out this here, the people call it prostitution, but really it's the sexual exploitation of our young women. You see that all the time and the impact that that's having on people's lives. I work with an organization in East Oakland called Youth Uprising. And they reach out to young women all the time. And it's a constant struggle of battling the pimps, battling the men who are the predators and so forth, trying to recruit these young women who might be coming from homes that have had their challenges. And so these are real issues, and it creates a cycle. So, some people might say, well, how is all this related to planning? It's all very much related to planning. So, Eric, you want to... So, I don't have a whole lot of time, but, I talked about some of the impacts for the ex-offenders. You can go on to the next slide, let's fast forward. And then, of course, the impact on wealth accumulation, right? So whether you've been locked up and then get out, what does your lifetime's earnings look like? I have colleagues who look at that kind of data. I have colleagues who look at if you've been exposed to environmental toxins, or you've been in a situation where you have had a lot of health problems early on, the impact it has on your lifetime earnings. And it's mostly impacting people who look like us. And then the issue of absentee fathers and mothers in the homes, and then how does that create intergenerational poverty and the challenges that we're trying to break. So there are things that people are doing. I don't want you to sit here and think that there are not good things that are happening. There are lots of good things happening. But we have to highlight some of these challenges. So let me just make a few more points. But I think that as you've been talking about today, and certainly we'll talk about for the next few days here at the APA conference, is how do you build community capacity? There's certainly great organizations out there doing that now. Many of you in this room have done this work. But we also have to address some of the larger structural factors that are impacting our communities. And then address disparities in arrest and sentencing, especially for drugs, because we know that's a huge issue. That's something that needs to be addressed. It's slowly starting to be addressed, but not nearly at the level that and intention that it needs to be at. Next slide, Eric. Certainly when we're thinking about community development, the issue of community policing and sensitivity training, that's always needed. Community-wide organizing, so you see these place-based initiatives, as I mentioned earlier. Some of the challenges with these initiatives is they don't organize. They don't organize. That's why faith-based institutions are so wonderful, especially when you think about Black churches. They're kind of organized and they reach out to people and find out what's going on in their lives. We know planning departments for the most part don't do that. Right? They have one planning meeting. I go to planning meetings and I tell you they want me to sign up so fast because I'm Black, right? And then they find out you're a professor. You're like, oh. But right away it's like, good to see you. Come on in. Have a seat. Sign up. Some water first. So, anyway, the last section I want to talk about is I think is important, and certainly an area that I think we have a lot of strength, is citizen participation, and certainly thinking about community engagement and how this is all part of our democratic process, the importance of our institutions and organizations. So when we think about this demographic change, what does that do to the strength of our institutions and organizations? Right? Because if there's something happening in your community, whether it be Lennar Corporation coming in to develop, or some other developer, or they don't want to clean up some toxic site, if you can't get the numbers to these meetings, you just aren't heard. Right? And so that's why I'm concerned about sort of seeing this Black exodus out of these major cities that traditionally have had wonderful Black neighborhoods, producing all kinds of talent, whether it be from scientists to athletes to singers to writers to whatever. Wonderful neighborhoods. In the fabric now is all changing, and you see that you go to more and more of these community meetings, you see less of us there, and our voices being listened to less and less. Right? Not everywhere, but areas that we're not as organized as we could be and should be. So to me, there's a big relationship here between urban planning, city planning, and democracy. And certainly when you start thinking about our metropolitan areas becoming these big places of diversity with millions of people, how do people's voices get heard? Right? You keep looking at the data, and the Latino population is growing in the United States. Blacks are staying somewhat stable. But people are really concerned about, are we still going to have the same kind of voice that we had before? Right? I mean, look how long it took with this Trayvon Martin case. I mean, it took, it was almost like Hurricane Katrina came to New Orleans, right? You're like, okay, I know they're coming today. Yeah. Then the next day you're like, I know they'll be here today. And then 5 days later you're like, it takes 5 days. I can fly from San Francisco to New York in the same day. Right? So you start to, how long does it take for things to happen? And you really have to start wondering about our political power and the things that we can do. So if you can just go, I think to the next slide is, I just think that as planners, we really have to reach out to people, whether it be, even people of color, other people of color, building these multi-racial and ethnic coalitions, but certainly reaching out to our people for sure, to start talking about some of the challenges that we're facing. And the real ways to address some of these things. I know that we've been burned over and over in the past, but we cannot lose the power of our institutions and organizations, and we have to really build on that. So, sorry to be so preachy, but this is stuff that I'm very passionate about, and I work, so if you're interested, this is some of the work I do, and I'd be happy to talk to you about that. So, I'd be happy to open it up and hear about what's happening in your community.